Hey there, Merritt here. Happy unusual summer of 2020. I am taking a break from producing new episodes this summer because I'm spending these months investing in my new mastermind group and working on 2 projects just for you that I haven't had time to finish before now, but I cannot wait to share them with you. The first is an audiobook roadmap of the spiritual journey of launching a God-shaped dream, and the other is my imposter syndrome curriculum intended to help you get past this very tough roadblock in your dreaming. So instead of new episodes, I'm re-releasing some of my favorite episodes from my first 5 seasons of the podcast. They're the ones that I loved, but maybe you missed, and I hope you enjoy them. And I have 2 tools just for you to help support your movement toward a God-shaped dream this summer. Number 1, I have compiled journaling questions for each of these episodes that will help you process your dream. And I want to challenge you, even though it's summer, even though it's still kind of a pandemic, that there's some deep internal work we can all benefit from before we're able to make real progress toward our dream. So go grab the journal packet in my store at merrittonsa.com/store. It's just $5 and it'll help you go deeper as you consider and begin to take the next steps in your dream. Then number 2, come find me and other dreamers inside the Devoted Dreamers Insiders group on Facebook. I'll be hanging out there at least once a week, and we can chat about whatever you're struggling with, the spiritual battles we face as Christians and dreamers, and how you can move forward despite it all. All right, thanks for being here, and now here is your episode for this week. Welcome to the Devoted Dreamers podcast. Yes, we have a new name finally, and I'm coming out of this transition from season 1 to season 2, having learned more techie things about podcasting than I ever imagined. So thank you so much for your patience with my slightly delayed return. And in case you're new and looking for the Momentum podcast, I can assure you, you are in the right place. This episode marks the launch of season 2. And we're kicking it off with a new name and new branding. We're still here talking about God-shaped dreams and how He uses the things He puts on our hearts to draw us to Himself. And just like last season, I will be here weekly sharing conversations with courageous women who are taking the next step toward the dream God has placed on their hearts. Right now, you are listening to episode 31, which is the very first episode of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. And if you must know, it's just easier to not have to renumber everything. So we are starting with 31. I hope that doesn't throw you off like it kind of does for me. But the new tagline for the podcast is cultivating the momentum we need to find and fuel our calling. I know you may be coming here without a dream in your heart, or any idea of what God may be calling you to. Or you might have some sort of idea, an inkling, a restlessness that you feel in your spirit. But wherever you are, my heart is to encourage you, to point you to God in the midst of your circumstances and share truth that might help you find the courage, space, and permission you need to take the next step toward your God-shaped dreams. In case you're new to me, I'm your host, Merritt Onsa. I've been kind of pondering what my title might be beyond podcast host, as if such a thing is needed in the podcast world, but right now I'm really liking curator of stories, because it's my passion to collect and share with you, dear listener, real life stories of what it looks like to listen and wait on God, even as He gives us things we don't expect, or when He seems to withhold things we do. And I want to clarify this season a little more of what I mean by a God-shaped dream. You see, a dream in my mind isn't just a desire to write a book or start a business or go overseas on mission. A dream is something God has planted within us that aligns with our gifts, talents, passions, and life experiences. And in addition to looking at our dreams, I also want to inspire you to dig more into God's Word and grow your relationship with Jesus above and beyond any circumstances you might be experiencing. We can so easily allow circumstances to fuel our joy or bring us down, but when we put our trust in Him to be our everything in the good times and the bad, it's then that we're able to live more fully where He's planted us. And now I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Angie Weszely. Angie is a speaker, writer, strategist, and dreamer. She is also a visionary, passionate about reframing the Christian response to abortion and unplanned pregnancy. Angie is the co-founder and CEO of ProGrace, a startup nonprofit organization that equips Christians for outreach through in-person training seminars and written resources that focus on God's heart for both the woman and the child. Angie lives with her family in Colorado, and I'm hoping to get to meet her in person one day very, very soon. I have been so eager to share Angie and ProGrace with you. I would have loved to do that closer to the anniversary of Roe versus Wade back in late January. But despite missing that opportunity, I know that what Angie has to share is still so relevant today. Our conversation starts out with how she came to lead ProGrace when she never had a burning passion about the mission she's now leading the charge on. And she shares about her past being stuck in legalism and how that's so different from where she's at right now. She talks about the years in which she thought her dream was dead and how God has surprised her along the way as He resurrected it in ways she didn't expect. I also asked Angie to give us a little equipping based on what ProGrace offers to churches to help change the abortion conversation. I think you're going to love hearing her talk about this third way the church can respond. Angie's heart is definitely for the radical grace of Jesus to intersect the lives of women with an unplanned pregnancy and the life of their child. She has a vision for restoration that gives hope to all, the woman, her child, and the church. I can't wait for you to hear from her on this topic and how God has used this dream to grow and change her. The interview is coming up next, but I also want to encourage you to listen all the way through to the end because Angie has developed a free resource just for you, listeners of this podcast, and I will share how you can find that in the closing remarks. And with that, here's Angie. Well, welcome, Angie. It's so nice to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Merritt. It's great to be with you.
Well, let's just jump right into it. Will you talk about the God-shaped dream and that's in your heart right now and kind of maybe a little bit of how you got here?
Sure. And first of all, I just want to thank you so much for doing a podcast on this topic. I went too many decades of my life without anybody really saying, what are the dreams God is putting in your heart? So I think what you're doing is so important. My journey was one actually out of a lot of legalism. That's just how I was raised, not by anybody's intent or fault, but the message in the gospel I heard was that it was up to me to please God. And I didn't even really hear about His unconditional grace until I was later in college. And so He's had to take me on quite a long journey before I could start dreaming, which is why it makes what's going on in my life now really sweet, because it really is His goodness and His kindness that has brought me to this place. I actually can't believe that I'm leading an organization that wants to change the Christian response to abortion, because this is not a dream that was in my heart when I was a little girl or even into my early adulthood. I always knew I wanted to follow God in ministry, and I wanted to change the world somehow, but I didn't have this specific calling until I just started making small steps, I would say, and having small dreams that I pursued. So I was actually in ministry right out of college and burned out, really badly burned out, both my husband and I. And so we stepped away from that and thought we needed some time just to learn to walk with God and learn about His love and grace. So there was a whole decade of my life where I kind of thought my dreams were dead, because that's what I always thought I would do, was be in ministry. And so as a result of God pouring into me and me learning about His love and grace, He started to rekindle some of these dreams. And I took a job at an organization that is still called CARIS, actually. It's a pregnancy counseling agency in Chicago. And I took the position of director of development because my background was in fundraising and sales, and it sounded like they were doing amazing work helping women and children. So I really thought it was a small step on the journey of coming back to being in ministry and kind of going back in after God had healed me. But I didn't have any specific attachment or fire for this topic until I actually started working at CARIS, and was working there for several months before I started realizing, man, there's a lot of tension around this issue of unplanned pregnancy and abortion. I just hadn't really been aware. I hadn't been someone who was involved in this field, and spent a lot of time just feeling kind of icky about conversations I was trying to have, or the way people were responding to me in the community, and even some of the things that our organization was doing and the ways we were talking to women. There were just things that were all around kind of making me uncomfortable. And I started asking God about it and what was going on. And I started doing some research on it. And I came across a website that had these words, "Are you for the woman and the child in this issue, and never knew where you fit?" And I felt like that was a God epiphany for me. That was a time where he just really grabbed my heart and said, this is what's been bothering you. That, one side talks about the needs of the woman, the other side talks about the needs of the child, but really he is for both. And so reading that simple word online started to ignite a fire in me for the first time about this issue. And I started talking about it at work, and I got mixed responses from my colleagues. It was an interesting time in the life of the organization, but got the notice of the president at that time and the board, and they actually interviewed me to see if I would want to lead the organization. And I should say that I really didn't have any experience that would prepare me or in my mind equip me to lead a nonprofit organization. But this was part of God just leading me on a path, and they decided to hire me to lead this organization and bring this change, that we could do a better job of helping both the woman and the child. And so I really threw myself into that. I mean, I was so excited after a decade of feeling like my dreams had died, to be able to walk into a position like this where I could affect change was so exciting. And I really wasn't looking beyond that. I really focused with my wonderful team. We had a great team. Simone was part of our team at the time. That's how I know her. And a lot of women who said, yes, let's do things differently. Let's talk about how we can, more intentionally meet the needs of the woman and not make her feel like Christians don't care about her. And let's see if we can have a different conversation around this issue. And so we changed all our programs and changed the way we talked about this. And I started writing theological papers on this and getting the input of Chicago pastors, because it's such a divisive topic that I found whenever I opened my mouth about it, people were misunderstanding me. And sadly, even some of our own staff were misunderstanding me. So we had people questioning what we were doing and saying, are you going off track biblically? And it just drove me closer to God, actually, and closer to these relationships with these pastors and thought leaders that could help us say, what I'm trying to say is this, and help get it on paper. And so that was actually probably about a 7-year journey. It took that long. And I'm the type of person that doesn't think things should take that long. So I remember sometimes feeling stalled out a little bit, like, God, I can see where we should be. Why aren't we there yet? But I had wonderful people around me saying, no, these things take time. This is okay. And it actually helped me in my faith journey to say, oh, when God births a dream in my spirit, it doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. And that's been key for me to learn in this process of dreams, and not getting discouraged in the midst of them, and letting him do his work in me, because as I look back, he was doing as much work in me as he was doing through me, as I was understanding more about his grace and just going deeper into abiding in him. So about 7 years into this process, we realized that the last piece that was missing for us in this program to show grace to women was a way for them to have long-term support. We want them to thrive during the pregnancy and their child to thrive during the pregnancy, and we want them both to thrive after. And so to be able to help them both thrive after, we're like, we have to have some type of long-term care. What is that? And felt like God led us to the local church being the way that women and children would be able to thrive if we could connect them with a local church. So we started trying to do that, and a lot of things failed in that process. There's a lot of barriers to women wanting to go to the church, and there's barriers for the church to know how to reach out to women, even though people want to. So after trying several things, we started writing this curriculum. It's actually like an experiential workshop that we would walk pastors and leadership teams through. And I remember writing the curriculum with my colleague, who is also the co-founder of ProGrace with me. And we were sitting around my dining room table in my home and laughing, saying, this is all we have. If nobody wants this, we'll just stop doing this. You know, it was really one of those, like, we don't know if anybody's going to want to go through this, but let's write it. So we wrote this workshop, and we piloted it with about 7 of the churches that we worked with. And, you know, at first, the reactions were always really good. There were some negative reactions, so we went back and tweaked it, and we would kind of change the order of things. But by the end of one summer, by the 7th church, I remember saying to them, why aren't you guys pushing back? Like, why aren't you guys making this harder on us? And they were like, well, we feel like you've answered all our questions as we've walked through, and this totally makes sense. And something in that moment made me realize, I think this might have been from God, that what we're doing here is being so well received by churches. You know, after you've done things for a while, you realize when there's favor on them as opposed to not. And it was like, wow, God may really have given us something that we need to take to other churches. So we started doing that, and we were shocked at how open the doors of the churches are to wanting to have a new conversation, a new understanding about these issues. That there's a lot of Christians who are very tired of the political debate, and who realize that God does not rest in one political party or the other. You know, when you follow Jesus, he's going to have us do radical things that are going to cross political lines. Mm-hmm. And so our real question is, what would Jesus be doing if he were here? You know, where is he in this issue? And I thought Christians might be skeptical of that just because of the way our conversation has gone for decades. But I found that God was, at the same time as he was waking us up and creating this desire to see a change, he's been moving in his church, and they really want to do something different. So that's really what I'm doing now. That's all come out of the time with Charis, that we got so many opportunities nationally and internationally to take this message to churches that we decided we would separate and launch and become our own organization, which has just happened about 5 months ago. So I'm in the middle of dreaming that God is going to change the Christian response to unplanned pregnancy and abortion, that he's going to equip his body to be much more vocal about his heart for the woman as well as the child, and not taking anything away from how passionate we are about the child, just adding to that the more full representation of his heart for the woman, that her dreams and her path and the plans he has for her matter to him, and that they're going to matter to us as Christians as well. And so we really envision that within a generation, this could shift the way we talk about abortion, the way we think about it, and the way we reach out to women who are facing unplanned pregnancy.
I mean, there's so much meat in everything you just said. I'm trying to figure out, like, where do we go now? Because I feel like, too, like, maybe you could give us a little mini equipping right here and now. I mean, could you do that for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One of the first revelations that we had on this journey, like I said, was this idea of God caring for both the woman and the child. And the way we break that down theologically is to really think about how God designed pregnancy, right? I mean, he could have chosen to bring life into the world any way he wanted, but he decided that he was going to intertwine a woman and a child for 9 months, which those of us who've been pregnant know that's a long time. Mm-hmm. And he's going to do that in such a way that anything we do to one impacts the other. And by doing it that way, he's made it impossible for us to say, I'm just going to try and help one and bypass the other. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for Christians to sit with that, to sit with his design of pregnancy and think about how we can respect his design of pregnancy, because that's where the political debate breaks down. With one side saying, you know, we're going to focus on the needs of the woman, and the other side saying we're going to focus on the needs of the child. Right there, we violated his design of pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And so for us to say, we're going to actually come back to how God designed this and say, he actually says yes. He says yes to all of it. He wants the woman to thrive during the unplanned pregnancy, and he wants the child to thrive. And his heart is even bigger than that. He wants them both to thrive after the pregnancy. So, just understanding that we need to be proclaiming the full truth of God's heart. And it really does start with his design of pregnancy. That's the first equipping tool. And then I would say the second core belief to ProGrace is to think about, what is God's path for transformation for any of us? It's always his grace. And the more I study the Gospels and how Jesus interacted, the more I see radical grace first. It's what he leads with. He's just always in there showing grace when people didn't think he should show grace. And it's actually knowing that he accepts us and loves us and gives us a new identity that allows us to then become more like him and live a holy life. When we, and I know this from my years in legalism, when we think it's up to us to please God, we just keep getting mired more in bad habits because we feel bad about ourselves. But when we truly accept grace, we can change. And this is important in this whole topic of abortion because unfortunately, the Christian response to unplanned pregnancy has been to participate in the shame that comes to women from every place in our culture. She's not just getting, and I'm not just trying to throw Christians under the bus. This is a cultural narrative right now that says to women, you made a huge mistake getting pregnant. Not so much the sex outside of marriage in the culture, which is another topic, but for us to really stop as Christians and pay attention to what she hears is going to be her fate and her child's fate if she continues this pregnancy, and to see how loaded that is with shame, and to realize that we have a chance to insert a radically different piece into this conversation, and that is the grace of Christ. And to be unashamedly extending grace first, like Jesus did, to women who are facing unplanned pregnancy. And what we've seen in our research and talking to women is it's shocking to them. It's shocking to them to receive this grace because it's not coming from other places in the culture. So, and that's what we take in our training, both of these two core theological beliefs, to let Christians have time to wrestle with, what do these two things mean in the context of how we reach out to women, ways we may need to repent and shift and change how we've been responding in this issue.
And so ProGrace is like an educational training organization helping to shape this conversation. Is that a good description?
That's a great description. Yes. So we want to equip Christians to have a different response to women. So we don't actually reach out to women directly. We equip Christians, and we really do it in three ways. The first is the transformation, which is what I just shared with you, like having us look at our own mental models and ways we've looked at this without realizing it, and really to have a paradigm for viewing this in a theologically sound way that's also different from how it's been framed before. So that's the first piece, is us transforming first. The second thing we do is train Christians how to have new conversations in their community. One thing we found out is this topic is so loaded that, I can say one word and someone will put me in a different camp. So ways we've learned how to have a grace conversation and go out and build a new reputation in the community that our churches are going to be safe for women, and a new way to talk about it that's really refreshing for non-believers as well as for the church. And then third, we call restoration, and we train Christians in a specific program on how they can reach out to women facing unplanned pregnancy and build these communities in their churches where women and children are thriving, where women are going back to college, where they're dreaming dreams for themselves and for their children. Because once there's communities like that happening, that's what can actually change the story around unplanned pregnancy and abortion. That's what gives women a third option. Right now, women think my only options are abortion or overwhelming struggle as a mom. Yeah. But if we can train enough churches to paint this story of restoration, that creates a third option for women. And we believe that's what can shift the tide of abortion. So we're very intentional, saying we believe local churches are the hope in this issue. And so we're going to focus just on training them.
So you just kind of gave us like your 10-year synopsis. And I know, like, looking back, I'm sure none of that was easy. So what has been some of the greatest difficulty you've faced in getting to where you are today?
Well, there's a couple of big ones. One of the biggest ones is really fear. Mm-hmm. So I can remember, I'd been asked to lead this organization. This is 10 years ago. And I started having these ideas, right, for how God may want us to talk about this differently, and the women and the child. And I remember being paralyzed by fear with this message because I knew that we would risk losing donors or people misunderstanding. And I don't think I would have thought I was a fearful person beside that, but something about the weight of this passion I was being given really triggered me. And I would say I spent years fearing, and I probably made some changes slower than I should have because I was almost over responsible for the organization rather than having radical faith in what God can do, if that makes sense. And I give myself a lot of grace just because that's where I was at. But this fear of what other people will think or how will we be provided for if I say this, at times like just weights on my shoulder, or actually maybe even weights on my feet, just keeping me from moving forward. And I would say linked to that was some of this sense of, well, who am I to do this, right? So this insecurity, or wasn't so much insecurity because I wasn't insecure in other areas, but when he started opening up this new area, I was insecure in that. It was like my picture of who I was or who I could be in Christ didn't line up with yet what he was calling me to do. And so I spent a lot of time just in self-doubt, or not really, it's not that I didn't take it seriously. It's that I think because of fear and insecurity, didn't step forward as boldly as I should have, if that makes sense, just because of thinking, who am I? Am I going to be able to do this? Which really, at the end of the day, both of those things translate into unbelief. And one of the big keys on my journey has been growing in faith and believing God. And even this study that Beth Moore did that was life-changing for me called Believing God, just really understanding how much of my focus on myself, and the fear was really unbelief that God was giving me this passion and this calling and this dream, but I was still stuck in not believing maybe he could really do it, or that he could do it through me.
Yeah. Or that you wouldn't just fall flat on your face and be a spectacle.
Right.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
And tank the organization. I felt I had responsibility to our staff and our donors, and right. And that sounds very noble and holy, but really it was unbelief.
And I think that's really common. So, we all kind of wrestle with that in some realm if we have any kind of fear that's stopping us from moving forward. So today, as you guys are still a really young organization, are you facing some new challenges that maybe aren't about fear or about something else?
Actually, they look different, but when I think about it, they are still, those two things of just fear and kind of not really, believing God is not that I don't believe he is who he says he is. It's more that, am I the right one to do this? So I would say that, yes. So I've come further on my journey to believe that he can do anything. And I've seen him do so many miracles that it's like I can never go back. I can never go back to not believing him or to striving to do things on my own. I think for me, because this is so new and I've never done anything like it, and because, I came from, even though we made a lot of changes at Caris, there was like a steady donor base, we were going to be funded. This is a whole new level of jumping off the cliff, not irresponsibly, because God, again, has shown that he's so in this, but still practically, I went from a more secure position to not secure. And so in some ways it's really liberating. It's very freeing. I feel like Peter getting out of the boat, I wouldn't be anywhere else. I love it. I love this level of needing to believe God. At the same time, sometimes I look at the wind and the waves and I do feel like I start to sink emotionally. I'll go into some dark places emotionally, and I need to look at him and remember his promises. And so remembering his promises through scripture and even things that he's spoken to me through others and that I've heard myself, I actually write things down to remind myself. I have to do a very intentional practice of believing that he's called me to do this, sometimes to come out of that emotional, what am I doing? Have I done the right thing? Am I really the right person to lead this?
So what does that practice look like for you?
So what I do is every morning, and I try to make it the first thing I do in the morning. It isn't always the first thing if I sleep in, because I've still got a child at home and other things, but I try to first thing just sit with the Lord. And I do several different things during that practice. I journal, and I journal kind of free flowing, whether it's shallow or serious, whatever I'm thinking, because I find that as I do that, things that are kind of bugging me under the surface will rise to the surface. And so I write about those to God. And in that time as well, I will pull out my scripture. So through believing God, I've developed this practice of carrying with me like a note file of scripture cards. And so I'll kind of go through, I have them arranged by topic of what I'm wrestling with that day. Yeah. And so I'll pull them out and I'll pray them out loud to God. And then I'll kind of tuck them in with me, where I'm going that day, but really intentionally saying, I'm going to be honest about what I'm feeling, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is what you're feeling today, God, and what you want to say to me and about me and what promises I can believe of yours. And then I stay steeped in books on grace, authors on grace, especially when I start getting into that place of, am I really the right person to do this? I try to then look at things that will take my eyes up to God and take my eyes off myself. So I'm really sensitive about some of the self-help Christian stuff that's out there and really try to listen to teachers and read them who talk about how big God is and who he is and how his heart is for us and his grace and his dreams, and try to stay centered in that, because I'm noticing I can't even read things I used to be able to read. It just takes me down that path of doubt. So, and then I do a lot of worship as well. And that's just kind of who I am as a worshiper. But that's another intentional practice that I do when I'm out in nature, hiking, or when I'm even here in the house working. If I start to feel myself going down that path, again, sometimes it helps just to put a worship song on, because there's someone who's talking about how great God is and how he views me. And so really just paying attention to my spirit, that anytime I go into that place, time for me to take a break and focus on God and go to him.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Thank you for diagramming that out for us.
Yeah.
I love it. So what are some of the verses that are kind of sitting on your heart right now?
Yes, there are actually. And this changes weekly. So this is just where I'm at right now. But I've spent a lot of time in John 15, which I love John 15 anyway, but specifically in this season, verses 5 and 7 jump out at me as just a promise of Jesus saying that if I will abide in him and let him abide in me, I will bear much fruit. I think that's the part that's standing out to me, like, I will bear much fruit. So in those times, again, where I'm like, am I really doing the right thing to move this organization forward? And am I the right person? Just that reminder that isn't even the right question. The right question is, am I abiding in Jesus and letting him abide in me? And it brings such peace and joy, actually. Like, I'll laugh when I finally think about that. Like, oh, this is super easy, God. You made it really, really easy. Why do I make it too hard? Because I can do that. I can abide in you because you're lovely and you're good. And then you promise me that as I do this, you will bear much fruit. So that's one. And then the other has to do a little bit more with my active belief and being more bold, which is something I feel like he's been speaking to me that, yes, he will bear fruit. And one of that fruit for me right now is boldness, that I'm supposed to step more boldly into things. And so I've been reading actually with my son in the Action Bible, which is like a graphic novel Bible. We've been reading about the Israelites coming out of their wilderness time and actually crossing into the Promised Land, and why they weren't able to do that, the 40 years before. And so this passage from Numbers 14, 7 through 9, actually is the spies coming back, and 10 of them said, we cannot take the land, right? The people are too big. We can't do this. And I've been meditating on how that made God really angry. That unbelief that they couldn't do it through his power made him angry. But the two spies, Joshua and Caleb, that came back, and that's what this verse is about, and said, the land is very good. And if the Lord is pleased with us, we can take it. And that idea of that through grace, Christ is pleased with me all the time. And so praying that verse back to him, like, you're pleased with me through grace, and this dream you've given me is very good. And so through you, I can actually walk into this promised land and take it. And then the passage goes on to say that we don't need to be afraid of the people in the land because their protection is gone, but God is with us. And to me, that speaks to, in my particular issue, I feel like there's a shifting that God has been doing, that he's been awakening his church. There's a new hunger in his church. And that has nothing to do with me. That has to do with God. And that idea that the protection or whatever of the old way of thinking of some of these things, it's a new season. That's what they were saying. Like, this is a new season. This is our season to take this. And so I actually pray that as a promise, and, I don't do this with every verse. I don't think you can just pick verses out of the Bible, but I do really pay attention to the context and also the Holy Spirit speaking in my soul. And I really felt like he said to me, you can walk into this. You can pray this promise that the protection is gone and God is with this new way of thinking that he's created. And so we can walk boldly into this promised land and watch him do miracles.
And he does the miracles.
Yes.
We just get to watch and sometimes participate.
Yeah, I actually it's so funny. I had a kind of an image pop into my mind early on when I was at Charis. I was in a time of great fear, actually, about something. And I was in even our conference room, and just this image came in my mind of these two huge angels with huge swords standing on either side of me. And I was really small in the middle, waving this little dagger with a big smile on my face. And to me, it's like, that's what it's like. It's like a kid getting to participate in something, but you know that it's actually the parent pushing it through. But he gives us the joy of being able to have our dagger, and go into battle knowing that he's got this. He's the one that ultimately wins it. And so understanding that balance, I think for me has been part of my journey is, yes, he's got it. He bears the fruit. He wins the battle. So what is he asking of me in this battle? What's the bold step he's asking me to take? Because he does actually ask me to participate, and in some ways, when you look at Jesus, the outcome of what Jesus did was dependent on what people asked him to do, right? Or how much faith they had. And so I think you can go to either extreme on either parts of that theology. So I feel like a lot of my time is spent saying, okay, God, you are going to do this thing. Now, what do you want me to do to participate? And to hold those things in attention, that he does the miracle, but I somehow play a part in how much I'm asking him for or believing him for, if that makes sense.
And I think a lot of times we can let fear keep us from the privilege of participating.
Yeah.
I've heard people talk about like, well, God's going to do this whether I'm there or not, and he might do it through somebody else or whatever. I can choose to participate and not let fear stand in my way, or he can go use somebody else.
Right. And I think there's just a lot of mystery around that, when you read the scriptures and you look at what Jesus said. And so I remember reading Believing God by Beth Moore, and she said, I'm going to err on the side of believing him and let him correct me if I go too much. And I've kind of taken that as well. Like, yeah, what's the worst that can happen if I'm too bold or believing him too much? He'll correct me, he'll bring me back. He's gracious, but I don't ever see him in scriptures. I never see Jesus criticizing anyone for too much faith or asking him to do, you know what I'm saying? Or asking him to do too big of a thing. But he's often saying, where is your faith? Where is your faith? But I never see him saying, oh, come on, guys, why are you thinking so big about that? He doesn't do that. So I feel like, okay, based on that, what I see in scripture, I'm safe, going for it and going bigger, erring on the side of bigger and trusting him to rein me in. Because I think, would the enemy be having me dream these big dreams? Right. I don't think so, right. So it's like, I'm going to believe that this is God and from him and trust that he can course correct.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I had never thought about it that way, but it's so true. I love it. Well, so in all of this, where have you run into some failures along the way, and how did you recover from those?
Oh, well, there are so many failures along the way, or mistakes that actually helped me not be so afraid of failure, if that makes any sense. And just seeing how God uses everything for the good causes me not to be so afraid of that anymore. But yes, I have made a lot of mistakes, and I'm sure I will make some more moving forward. The one that's freshest to me, because it's most recent, is just over the last several years, as God was opening doors for ProGrace and for us to train churches, specifically another colleague and I were very passionate about that. And we were pursuing that. So we were pursuing that as God opened doors in Africa. We were going to Africa to do this. We were trying to work with more churches in Chicago. We were getting phone calls from other churches and other pregnancy organizations in other parts of the country. And we were just so excited about this calling that we didn't see what was happening at Caris, at our organization, and how people were being impacted by that until things got really, really bad. So I remember I kept thinking, gosh, the staff doesn't seem as excited about this as we are, or there seems to be some confusion about this. But in my excitement to move forward, I didn't really stop and pay attention to those nigglings. I didn't really lean in and ask the staff, hey, what's going on? Why are you feeling this way? I just kept saying, this is the way God is leading us. We're going to keep moving forward. And, I had another colleague who was in leadership with me. She felt the same way. The board was very excited. It wasn't like I didn't talk to anybody, but looking back, I realized I didn't really do my due diligence of saying, what is going on with this tension of the staff and why are they feeling this way? And so we actually got to the point where people started leaving the organization. And I remember taking that really personally. It was the first time that had happened to me. And it made me stop and really say, what are we doing here? Is this really God's plan for us to be moving this message to Caris if there are people leaving the organization? And have I done everything to communicate to people the vision and what's really happening? And so we actually had a consultant come in who kind of said, it's really best that there be two organizations here because it's two different missions. Caris was serving women, and then this burden to equip churches came out of that, but it was becoming its own separate thing. And so, I can look back on that failure and say, I didn't intentionally hurt anyone. I didn't try to hurt them. I did value them, but they got the message from me that they weren't valued because I didn't pay attention to just organizationally what was happening. And so I've circled back with people and asked them to forgive me, and I've forgiven myself. But if I could go back, I would definitely do that differently because it's really hard as a leader to see that the decisions you're making are inflicting pain and to wonder if I could have stopped that sooner. Could that have not had the same outcome for the organization and those people? So, even being able to say that I made that failure as a leader takes a lot of grace and knowing that I'm covered in God's grace, but it's definitely something I will take with me into this new organization and trust God that, I never make a mistake like that again.
Mm. So the learning in that is just, is that about communication with your team, or what do you feel like is your big takeaway?
For me, I think the big takeaway is to pay attention when I can tell something is wrong. So I could tell something was wrong, but I didn't lean into that enough. I just didn't try to find out. So then, yes, that does lead to communication and asking questions, but I think I should have even got help sooner. I should have realized this was out of my area of expertise sooner if we had brought someone in a little sooner, as well as even just praying the prayer, asking God, will you reveal truth of what's happening? I found that in other situations where I feel just a niggling feeling, when I stop and say, God, reveal the truth of what's going on, he does. I think here I was so excited and feeling so energized about what was happening that I didn't take the time to stop and ask him that. Just to reveal the truth of what's going on so that we could communicate correctly. I was trying to communicate. It wasn't like we weren't doing anything, but I think we just weren't getting to the root of it because I don't think I was taking the time to stop and just say, why am I feeling this tension? What do you want to show me, God? And lean into that a little more earlier on. Eventually we finally did, and so we've had a really great outcome. I haven't seen organizations separate always very healthy, and this one's been so healthy. So I even feel like we applied that learning really quickly to the launching of the organization, but that if I could have asked that question before, maybe some of our team could have stayed with us for that journey.
I was going to mention, you got wrapped up in your excitement.
For the dream. Yes.
Yeah. It wasn't that you were trying to hurt anybody's feelings or step on anybody's toes. You were just excited about what God had given you. And it maybe even speaks back to what you were saying before. Let's err on the side of bigger and let God scale back if that's what he needs us to do. Okay. So Angie, what, this is everything that you're walking through is really exciting. And I feel like has great potential to do really important things in the church. But what has you freaking out?
Oh, gosh. All of it. I've never done anything like this where if God doesn't show up and move, I'm going to fall flat on my face. And that's exciting. So the same things that have me so excited also have me freaked out, if that makes sense. Just like I have no experience leading a startup. I try to read these books on leading startups, and sometimes I just get so agitated I have to shut them. Like, okay, God, I'm going to do the best I can, but that a lot of this isn't even my personality. I'm really good at getting the message out there, and that's what I feel comfortable in, and what God has called me to do. All this other stuff is like, okay, God, you really have to provide, other people on the leadership team to do it, or the funding for it. You got to open the doors of the church. You got to make sure they're ready for this message. Like, everything about it is just, is like that. We're trying to create a new envelope, as it were, a new way of thinking about this. And you study movements that have done that. And again, I get overwhelmed. Like, I don't know how to do that. But I go back to what I know how to do. I know how to listen to him and get his words that he's given us and then proclaim them to people. So I just really try to keep it really simple with that. Like, you've already shown me that I know how to do this. The rest of it has me kind of freaking out, God. So either provide other people or, and he does, when I look at the whole big picture, I freak out. And my colleague Denise is so good at saying this. She started saying, God, just show me what I have to do today. Well, when you say that, it's like, oh, well, you actually open this door with someone who understands about this, so I can follow up with them today, and I can write this blog today, and I can pursue this church that has an open door today. I don't have to think about how you're going to shift the whole conversation. I can just do what you're calling me to do today.
That's really helpful, because I think my next question is, what advice would you give? And that right there is really good advice. I like to say, we just take one step at a time.
Yeah.
We don't have to envision the entire end result and expect it to be done tomorrow.
Right.
I love that you shared that thing about just taking one step at a time, or what do I need to do today? I think that's so helpful, because we can get bogged down by the big dream. Mm-hmm. So what other advice would you share for someone who's kind of struggling in that place of, how do I take the next step, or what is the next step?
Couple things, as I shared earlier, that the things that would hold me back from taking steps were either my view of God or my view of myself. And so I would just recommend immersing yourself in those two topics. That's what's been most helpful for me, is to really understand God's love, his grace, his power, how big he is, listen to people that talk about how big he is. And then also my identity, his grace, everything that the cross means, that Jesus has forgiven me, and really who he says I am. Because for me, when those things weren't settled, I couldn't even take the next step. So, that's the first step. And then the other step is just understanding that getting to a big dream is really a series of following little dreams. And, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, this wasn't on my radar that I would be equipping Christians with a new response to abortion. At that time, my dream was, I just want to get back into ministry, because God had done healing in my life. I just want to do something significant, so I picked up the phone and applied to work at Caris without knowing where that was going to lead. But that was a dream that was in my heart that day, and then when I got in and realized this is what I'm feeling, just taking that next step, not even every day, but also in that season, and realizing it's okay if there's not a huge dream even on our horizon. That hasn't been every season in my life that I've had a huge dream, but it has been every season where I've said, this is kind of what I want for myself for this next season, or this is what I'd like to be doing, in several years. How could I take the next step toward that? And so it really is a culmination of all the smaller dreams that even for me got me to the place where I was positioned to even have a big dream, if that makes sense. So, totally. This all started 20 years ago when I took the first risk of my first job out of college being in ministry, and then it led me on this kind of circuitous path. But as I look back, really following our heart and trusting that if we have invited the Holy Spirit to lead us and guide us, then we can trust our heart. We can trust these dreams. And even if they seem silly or small, we can still go after them, because we don't know what that's going to open up for for the next step, and get to the next vista on the mountain, as it were. We can't often see what's around the corner, but we can you say, today I'm feeling led to go here. I'm going to do it.
Yeah. We hardly ever see what's around the corner.
Exactly. That's true. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
We never, very rarely do we get a glimpse.
Yeah. Well, and it just lets him be God, we can't control that. And I love what you said about just being reminded of how big he is.
Yeah.
That there are no corners he can't see around. And so he knows where he's taking us, and he's with us in that. So
yeah. And I think too, if I can say one more thing, because this was big, is again, just really trusting that, I think so often we doubt our dreams, right? We say like, oh, maybe I'm not supposed to do that. But again, asking that question, where would this have come from? Like really taking every dream seriously and saying, why would I doubt this? If it's in me and I've surrendered to God, there's a good chance it's from him. And so even in that, erring on the side of saying, God, I'm going to go for this. This isn't you, show me. But I think too often we err on the side of, oh, that can't be God because it's too good, or it's too big, or it's too different from how I view myself, and just really daring to dream. We actually brought some folks in at Karis. It's been many years ago, that encouraged us to write down 100 dreams, 100 dreams from big to small. And I just talked to one of my former colleagues who realized in that session, she'd been divorced for a very long time. Her husband had left her right when she was pregnant, and her son was now getting ready for college. And she realized in that session that she did want to be married again. And I just talked to her now, however many years ago that this is, and she's getting married next week.
Wow.
And she looks back to that time where she realized, like, I can dream this. And so I love that idea of from small to big, write the dreams down, give them to God, and give him a chance to actually accomplish some of these things.
What a great exercise. It'd probably take me a couple days.
It might.
At least.
It might.
Yeah.
Take certain people, certain personalities. Some people can do it quickly. Others, it takes a while, but it is a great exercise.
Yeah. Well, you've talked, during our conversation, you've mentioned some books and resources that you love, like Believing God by Beth Moore. What are some other things that you would share for just the encouragement of those who are listening in?
Sure. I also love the book Hearing God by Dallas Willard. And I think that's a key piece in this journey, is trusting that we can discern his voice and what that looks like and how he speaks to us. So I highly recommend that book. I also love The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom, which is a different format. But for me, that is the bigness of God and how he showed himself in that whole journey, and just how she grew in her faith has always been very inspirational to me. I also love a church in Reading called Bethel Church, and they have podcasts. Specifically, their pastor, Bill Johnson, just has a really big view of God, and goes through scripture talking about how God wants to move. So I listen to their podcasts. Some of my favorite worship that I'm listening to right now is Jesus Culture, which I love everything they put out, but their newest album called Let It Echo has some great songs about the bigness of God. There's even a song on there called God of Miracles, and a story of how that was written that really blesses me. So, those would be my top picks for now.
Awesome. Okay. I'll put all that in the show notes. And then I might catch you off guard with this, but I want to ask you a question that I didn't prep you for. I'm calling this my big ask. So if you could ask for anything that would propel you or ProGrace forward, knowing that, who knows who could be listening to this now or a year from now, as long as it lives on the internet, what would you ask for? What would be a big, daring thing for you to ask?
That is such a great question. As a startup, we need to see a movement of people gathered who will embrace this for themselves, who will want to go through the exercise of being transformed and having new conversations and bringing restoration, and who will also want to provide the resources so that we can move this forward. And it's funny because it's just two people right now, but the dream that we look for involves other people on our leadership It involves us getting in touch with networks of churches, denominations. There's a whole Africa component to this, worldwide. Like this could go so big, but it won't if it's just the two of us. So, if anyone feels called to join the movement, to even contact us. I mean, we're looking for key people on our leadership team that I don't know who they are. I'm not even sure what skill set they would need to have, but trusting that they would be the people that God is calling. And for pastors who would say, yes, come to my city. I want to see our city saturated with this ProGrace message. And for people who say, this resonates so much in my spirit that I want to give a large gift, like almost seed money for us, because we launched out with not really much of a donor base. It's like, a few people have come with us, but really needing to find people that say, we want to address the systemic issue that's driving abortion. My big ask is for people that will believe with us that God can do this, that in 25 years, we can look back and say, wow, I can't believe that's the way we used to address abortion, that we used to just vote about it every 4 years and then not talk about it because we were so uncomfortable. I can't believe that we only talked about the child, that people would believe with us to the extent that they'd want to join our team or bring us into their churches or bless us with large gifts that would allow us to propel this movement forward.
And when you say there's only two of you, it's like there's two of you on staff with ProGrace. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, two of us and a wonderful board and some great volunteers and about 10 donors right now. I mean, that's where it's like we need God, and I know he's going to do it, but that's why our big ask is we need God to call others to join us.
Yeah.
And to take the leap with us.
Yeah. Well, I pray along with you that he is doing that right now.
Thank you.
Well, how can people stay in touch with you guys and learn more?
Yeah. If you go to our website, which is just prograce.org, you can sign up for our email list. And our email is a little different in that we're wanting to take people on the ProGrace journey through our email. So we will send tips for how to have a conversation or think about this, kind of some ways that we're being transformed through the email list. And then we blog on our site as well if people are interested in seeing kind of more of the meat behind what ProGrace is. But those are really the best ways right now through the website to sign up for the email and keep in touch with us that way.
Well, Angie, thank you. I'm so thrilled that we got to talk, and I'm just grateful for you and the wisdom and the experience that you've been through and have shared with us today. So thank you for that as well.
Well, thank you. And again, thank you for encouraging people to dream. I'm excited for what God's called you to do and all the fruit he's bringing from that.
If you have ever felt like your dreams were dead or stalled out, this was the episode for you. Angie not only paints a picture of how God can resurrect our dead dreams, but she also confronts us with the truth that he may do it in a way we couldn't possibly imagine. And that's totally up to him. Our job is obedience, to follow where he leads and give him glory along the way. I so appreciated learning from Angie about ProGrace, especially as she talked about how God's design for pregnancy breaks down the political debate around abortion. This issue has held such a place of turmoil in my heart over the years, and when I first saw the video on the homepage of the ProGrace website explaining their vision and mission for their ministry, the first thing I thought was, this is a message that's been missing all along. I also feel grateful for Angie's assurance that she's on the path God laid out for her and the way she trusts him to redirect her if she turns the wrong way. It was fun to hear her confidence about being bold for the passion he's given her, and even that it wasn't always the case at the beginning. But she's learned to overcome her doubts and fears each time she took a step of faith and saw God's hand in what came next. I really needed to hear that, and maybe you did too. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that Angie has a free resource for listeners of the Devoted Dreamers podcast to help you move forward with what you've learned today. ProGrace has found that 90% of Christians they've surveyed say this topic is one of the most important social justice topics the church should be addressing. So here's a tool to help you get started on that. It's called 3 Steps You Can Use Today to Bring Grace into the Abortion Conversation. You will find a link to this free resource on my website at meritonsa.com/podcast/31. And I will also put that link in the show description so you can find that in your app and hopefully just click right to it. Well, there you go. Season 2 of the Devoted Dreamers podcast is now underway, and I'm thrilled you joined me today and share your precious time with me. It really means a ton. Whether you listen in the car or while you're folding laundry or on a run, it's a blessing to know you're out there joining me in this conversation. Thanks for listening to this repeat episode of the Devoted Dreamers podcast. I'm doing this all summer long, resharing some of my favorites that you might have missed, but I will be back with new episodes in September. Until then, come find me in my Devoted Dreamers Insiders group on Facebook, and don't forget to grab those journaling questions at my website, meritonsa.com/store, to help you process what you've heard here today. Thank you again so much for joining me. And wherever you are with your God-shaped dreams, may you have the courage to take one step toward their realization today.